Welcome to episode 25 of Lizzie's Bedtime Stories. My storyteller this evening is Mary Vermillion. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Liz.
It was so super meeting you at GCLS, and I liked watching your panel.
Oh, thank you. It was great meeting you, too.
So how did you end up on that panel?
I don't think there's a great story to it. I think Patty just put me on that panel. Patty, who's in charge of the conference.
Patty Schramm?
Mm-hmm.
And what was the name of the panel?
Boy, I think it was... Well, it was something about mysteries. I'm afraid I don't remember very well.
That's okay. There's no quiz at the end of the program.
Okay.
I thought it was really funny seeing the different types of mysteries, detective novels, thrillers, and listen to Allie Valley talk about her King Casey series and all the peril. The reason why I bring it up is because I thought it was fascinating before I got to read your stuff about how the murder mysteries that you write pretty much happen all in the same setting, with the exception of the first one, which starts on a drive to Mara's hometown.
Uh-huh.
So how did that come about?
Well, the first one, the one that I wanted to set in Mara's hometown, that was actually based on a desire I had to write something about my own hometown, which is a very small town in southwestern Iowa, and it just seemed like it was dying, and I wanted to capture what it was like to grow up there before it went away. So, But my character was not the sort who would actually live there, so I had her going back home, and then there was a big to-do about Walmart coming to that town, and then the other two are set in Iowa City, where I live, just because I think it's a fun place, and there's not that many novels set in Iowa.
No, there aren't. I was wondering as I was sitting in the panel, I was like, how is she going to end up having all these different debacles, these different murder mysteries showing up in one, well, I guess it's a college town, not necessarily a small town.
Right.
So I was interested in seeing how that worked. So you're going to be doing a reading from one of your novels? Mm-hmm. Can you set up that reading, please? Sure.
So this is from my most recent novel, which is called Seminal Murder. And I got interested in the backstory for this novel, thinking about how so many of my friends were going through so much in order to adopt or conceive children. Mm-hmm. And I've always been the sort of person who always knew that I did not want to have children. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that would be an interesting tension to explore. And then I thought, okay, where does the murder come in? Let's have it in a sperm bank. And so, hence the title, Seminal Murder. My main character, Mara, was actually close friends with the murder victim, who was the director of that sperm bank. And in addition, one of her exes, whom she's still sort of in love with, is trying to have a baby using that lab. So that, and the fact that she's doing a story on it for NPR is how she gets embroiled in trying to find who killed her friend. And the section I'm going to read is from the middle of the novel. Okay. And it's actually a baby shower that Mara goes to. And I've taken out a few bits that might give something away to readers who haven't read it yet. But I think it gives a nice feel for Mara and her community and sort of the tone of the book. Okay. So here goes. The room was filled with preschoolers who were making quick work of the gender-neutral party decorations. Tearing at the pale green and yellow crepe paper, they swatted the matching balloons and chased each other around the overburdened gift table, pausing only for a second as I added my present, a book called Baby's First Bard, Shakespearean Tales for Toddlers. I want a present, proclaimed a gray-eyed girl. Me too, cried a boy, the biggest one. He tried to point, but he had nearly mummified himself with crepe paper. There was a chorus of Me Toos, some pushing and shoving, and I was surrounded, Night of the Living Toddlers. These presents are for the new baby, I said to the pint-sized mob. The mini-demons ignored the voice of reason and pressed closer to the table. Any second, those gifts were going to come a-tumbling down. My stomach growled, and inspiration struck. Look, I pointed at the refreshments. Let's see if there's candy. They stampeded across the room and stood eye level with some pâté. That looks like poo, said a girl. She rubbed a balloon against her hair, which was already live with static, a blonde dandelion puff. Where's the candy? Demanded the mummy. Some sage adult had placed the sweets on the far side of the table. I'll get everyone a cookie, I said, as if I were in control. I'm not supposed to have peanuts, said Static Girl. Me neither, said the mummy. I'm also allergic to wheat and milk. The boy next to him announced that he couldn't have chocolate. The girl next to him declared eggs off limits. I studied the sugar cookie in my hand. It looked innocent enough. Pastel frosting that matched the decimated decorations. Go find your parents, I said. Ask them what you can have. Much to my surprise and relief, the kidlets drifted away. I closed my eyes and took a bite of cookie. I tried to focus on the buttercream frosting, the hint of almond and vanilla. Let me tell you whose sperm I want. My eyes flew open. There was Lindsay Hoover, one of the many women who'd been waiting to visit the new baby at the hospital the day Grace was murdered. Now Lindsay stood at the other end of the food table, addressing the newest women's studies professor at the university. Tamar Thomas was a cute 30-something, butch in a nerdy sort of way. I'd been attracted to her until I heard her talk. The woman couldn't string together 2 sentences without mentioning Princeton. Occasionally, for variety, she'd complain about Iowa. The people here are so nice, she'd say, as if being nice were a crime against nature. I'd take Kyle Bremer's sperm any day, Lindsay announced. He's got it all, looks, smarts, personality, and he's gay-friendly. You can tell all that from meeting him once, Tamar asked. I've also heard good stuff about him, Lindsay said. Excuse me. A guy with a thin mustache edged in between me and the vegetable tray. I'm having a really hard time choosing a donor, Tamar said. There's a guy who's almost perfect. He's tall, he plays the mandolin, and he has a PhD from Princeton. But he's allergic to cats. Is that a deal breaker? Lindsay asked. A very pregnant young woman joined them. He also gets headaches, Tamar said. I thought about my sister's husband, the father of my charming nieces. Phil talked way too much about mutual funds, but he was a good, decent man. Poor thing would never make it as a sperm donor because he had an overbite and hangnails. Why mess with a lab? The newcomer asked. You must have pals who are willing to donate to the cause. She patted her belly. Lindsay and Tamar exchanged glances. Why pay for something you can get for free? The pregnant woman asked. When Renee and I processed that issue, we realized that we wanted more than our friends could offer. Lindsay spoke as if she were addressing a recalcitrant toddler. The donor we chose has Renee's exact coloring. He shares some of her interests and some of mine. Our values, too. Our choice validates our partnership. The mother-to-be grabbed a canapé and exited. Does he like dogs? Tamar asked. Lindsay nodded smugly. Was I hearing right? Did they actually believe they could determine whether their child would be a dog or a cat person? And that's it for that excerpt.
Oh my God. Could you imagine? Ugh. I grew up in Hoboken, which is a small town conceptually because it's a mile square, but it's also on the Hudson across from Manhattan. And it's a bedroom community of folks who go to work in the city, and the majority of them are very well-to-do. And I can just imagine this conversation about sperm donors amongst those folks.
Yeah. It just strikes me as interesting at the amount of control people think they can have over their children. And then in the novel, I'm also kind of attacking really people who think they can control other people's families, because there's a nasty right-wing group involved too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I was younger, I went to a school for the gifted and talented, though I felt the least talented and gifted of all of them. But we talked about these different concepts of making the perfect child, using abortion as a way of getting rid of a child that might have a developmental disability or whatnot. And I know, bizarre conversation usually for 9 to 12-year-olds, but you can imagine the brilliant yet socially maladjusted kids that we were. So we were talking about these things, and I remember years later, I had been babysitting for somebody who was going to the same school, which is the Hudson School. And I was talking to the mother, and the mother was absolutely appalled when I talked about our lunchtime conversations. Apparently things had changed, the environment in Hoboken had changed, and there's this... There was a book that came out in the early 80s called The Yuppie Revolution, something along those lines. And so the town changed a lot from... I went to a cooperative school, and my parents were hippies, and I think not quite to the level of Orchid and Anne, not that serious, but I grew up in that kind of creative environment. And then the environment in Hoboken now is more, the well-to-do, very, very successful folks, and they have different and delicate sensibilities for their children. Alas.
Yeah, it's amazing how things can change.
So you have a second reading for us. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. It's a personal essay called Coming Out, the Ripple Effect. And it's actually the very first lesbian thing I ever published back in 2002 and in an anthology that Allison put out. It's a collage essay because I found when I came out, I got such very interesting responses, and including one from my father, which I end the essay with. That was his response is really what prompted me to write it. So it's just kind of the range of responses. Mm-hmm. Here goes. Mm-hmm. Magic Johnson is on TV at my second favorite bar, announcing that he is HIV positive. I admire his courage, so I tell my best friend that I think I might be a lesbian and that I'm obsessed with a woman on our volleyball team. She turns bright red and takes a long swig of Guinness. Things are changing too fast for her. Her brother was killed in a car accident a year ago, and since then we have spent almost every evening together. She is losing her haven, the apartment I share with my husband. An old college friend visits and gives me a massage that can only be construed as sexual. I say that I am for sure bi, maybe lesbian. The back rub stops. I have misinterpreted her intentions. She is not like that. She had resigned herself to being homosexual, but then a minister laid his hands on her and drove it out. I ask if she is attracted to men. Yes. Any particular ones? Well, no, not yet. A week later, she sends me a book called Healing the Homosexual. I send it back with a note saying, I hope you find what makes you happy. I tell the woman on my volleyball team that I'm attracted to her. She's flattered, but nothing happens. Then, months later, she downs several shots of whiskey and makes love to me. She says that it doesn't mean I'm a lesbian. I decide it does, and I leave my husband. A year and a half later, I leave her. I mail a blurb to my 10-year high school reunion. I'm getting divorced and finding new ways to love. When I call a friend to share my cryptic brilliance, she says it sounds like I've found Jesus. My sister is not surprised. I was wondering, she says, because you have so many gay friends. You gonna tell Mom and Dad? A college friend tells me that she French kissed a woman once. They were both really drunk, of course, and it was just that one time. I call a friend from high school to ask if he's coming to the retirement party for our former debate coach. He says no and asks how my husband is. I tell him that we got divorced and that I married someone else. He politely asks for a name. Beth, I say, hoping he won't freak out. You go, girl, he hoops. He and David are celebrating their 2nd anniversary. They own a house together, and their gladiolas are the envy of the neighborhood. We laugh, and he makes me guess who else is, quote, riding the bus, unquote. His younger sister. We speculate about other people from our past, shrieking at each name. A friend from grad school congratulates me on fulfilling myself. She gleefully tells me that her husband is threatened by her career. My old study buddy from Chaucer class says she was in a threesome once with a man and another woman. She sips her wine and looks at me expectantly. I run into a woman I haven't seen in years. I'm wearing a Pride Fest t-shirt, so I give her the condensed version. Big changes, love my job, love my life with Beth. She honors me with a fuller narrative. She has gotten divorced. Since then, she has bought and sold 2 houses. She is much better at buying houses and cars than her husband ever was. She became a grandmother, explored Ireland, and attended Clinton's inauguration. She quit her job as a secretary and became a union organizer. Sometimes I worry how my students will react, but this one begins talking about herself. She was a surrogate mother. Nobody understands that it was one of the best times of her life. She and her 6-year-old son got to live in New York. They were treated royally, and she became extremely close with the couple, especially the woman who sends her a picture of the little girl every Christmas. My dad drives 3.5 hours to listen to me. When did you know? Are you with someone? Can you keep your teaching job? There is love and caring behind each question. He reminds me that he was in Korea. He never killed anyone, he explains, but he taught people to. He was an artillery trainer. When he left there, it was the best day of his life. What he doesn't say. He knows I have struggled to tell the truth about myself, and he wants to do the same.
I loved the collage style of it, and how it was these tiny little vignettes. And what I think is valuable is that you were able to get across a lot in each short element, which is difficult to be concise and to tell a story that actually, gives a little bit of a flavor for you and the person that you're speaking with, and how it was a reflection on your process of coming out. And I like that a lot. That couldn't have been easy. Did it take a lot of editing?
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, it's been a long time since I wrote it, but I think I originally had a lot more stories in it, and that I worked pretty hard to keep them short. So probably a lot of condensing occurred. But I was just blessed with interesting responses. I mean, I didn't make any of that up.
I know, it's like apropos of nothing. Like some responses are completely unrelated and just, going on about you giving the condensed version of your life and she giving you the long version.
Yeah.
I always wonder, sometimes when you're talking to people, I can there's some folks where you can sense that they're pretty much just waiting for you to pause so they can turn their conversation back to themselves.
Yeah. Except I think with most of the people I put in the essay, I think that a lot of them were like my dad, that they felt sort of honored that I had shared something personal, however cursorily. Mm-hmm. And so I think they wanted to exchange the favor somehow.
Oh, I can see that.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying that within your essay that was the type of reaction somebody was giving, but it's always interesting when you're sharing something as personal as coming out, or anything that's, I think sharing your writing is an intimate act. Mm-hmm. I'm not a published author, but I do write on occasion, and I remember I had written a couple of really short kind of flash fiction pieces, and I had given them to a friend of mine who I had spent endless hours listening to her stuff, mm-hmm. And being a good listener and drinking wine and being up until sunrise and talking and whatnot. And I handed her something that couldn't have been more than 2 pages long. And she read a paragraph or so and then stopped and started to talk about how what I had written reminded her, and we circled back to talking about the girl that she was dating.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
I know.
You found someone else to share your writing with.
I was like, it's so funny because I always say you never know a person until you give them an opportunity to be on the forces of good or evil, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And I never realized how self-absorbed she was until that moment, because she was always very generous with her time, driving me home, even though it was kind of out of her way, buying drinks when I didn't have money, and other stuff. And so she was so generous with that. And then I realized in some ways, I was definitely paying for everything. The like 4-hour-long conversations where we rehashed stuff, and I always was a good listener to her kind of things. And then I slowly but surely saw how the reason why I never noticed is because my relationship was healthy. And I didn't have anything to complain about. So since it was healthy and I had nothing to complain about, I never had to, experience what it would be like to talk about something other than what she was going through.
Wow.
People.
You could have at least finished reading your piece.
Do you know what? It was the thing that killed me is that it was so short. She didn't even get through the first page. And, even if my writing was abysmal, you're, as a friend, especially a friend that you spent almost like a full-time job worth of time listening to, you would think that they would kind of finish reading it. You would. Common courtesy would dictate. Oh my God. People are so funny. I guess that's what makes writing exciting, at least for me, is writing all the different characters, their behaviors, their reactions, their foibles, etc. It's one of the things I find really attractive about writing. So, and that's also what I'm really attracted to as a reader. I mean, first and foremost, I'm a reader and I'm a listener as well, which is why I created Lizzie's Bedtime Stories, because I like when people tell me stories. Like a little kid, I'm like, tell me another one. Speaking of, you have a final piece that you're going to share with us. Mm-hmm. So it's about your partner?
Yeah. If you all remember the Beth I married in the last essay, Beth appears again in this one. And I should say I'm a little nervous about reading this because this hasn't been published, so I'm probably still in the process of writing it. It's part of a book that my partner and I are writing together, or the ideas in it are, and I guess I'll just let it speak for itself. Hopefully it stands on its own. It's called 5 Rings. Altogether, my husband and I wear 5 wedding rings. We exchanged the first 2 in 1995 when he was called Beth, and we tied the knot as a seemingly lesbian couple. 2 years earlier, Beth had told me she was really a man but would never do anything about it. I hadn't believed her on either score. Newly out as a lesbian, I couldn't fathom why a woman would want to be a man. Beth knew you didn't need to be a man to do so-called guy stuff, and she didn't seem like one of those self-loathing women I'd read about in women's studies, utterly duped and decimated by the patriarchy. Yet, if somehow Beth was right and she really was a man, how could anyone not want to do anything about it? For better or for worse, I ignored these misgivings and barreled forward, in love with Beth and with being a lesbian. During our commitment ceremony, when Beth gazed into my eyes, when she placed a ring on my finger and said her vows to me, I was beyond euphoric. My best friend, the cutest and smartest woman I'd ever met, was promising to love me forever. Me. How was this possible? How had I gotten so lucky? By coming out, that was how. As a lesbian, I had escaped my wretched first marriage. I had found true love, found myself and my community. My lesbian identity would protect me from all things heteronormative, patriarchal, and otherwise undesirable. I was a lesbian, self-actualized, and able to leap societal rules in a single bound. 6 years later, when Beth once again came out as transgender, using the word itself, and this time saying that she did need to do something about it, I felt like I was losing everything. Not just her gorgeous body and the bliss of making love with her, but my identity, myself. I said I'd leave her if she became a man. Then I tried to imagine my life without her, but I could summon only happy memories of our life together. One of those memories involved my wedding ring and, oddly enough, a bout of thyroid cancer. After my thyroid was removed, I was scheduled for a radioactive ablation. I would drink radioactive iodine that would kill any remaining cancer and thyroid cells. The stuff would make me a temporary biothreat, so I would be in a hospital room, isolated, with a hazard sign on my door. During the surreal procedure, Beth kept my wedding ring so that it wouldn't become radioactive, and she sent me into my isolation chamber with one of her hilariously sweet homemade cards. It was addressed to her radioactive lover. Then followed several definitions of the word isolate. 1, to set apart or cut off from others. 2, to place in quarantine. 3, to render free of external influence, insulate. 4, to be painfully separated from your wife and hamster. 5, something that bites a really, really huge butt. 6, something that is scary, but that we're in together. Beth had never let me forget that she loved me, yet when she first started to transition, I had isolated myself. I had turned away from her and from our future. I was turning my back on my most cherished childhood dream, to live in a house full of books with my best friend. Beth had made that dream a reality, and I was going to forfeit it. I was going to break the wedding vows Beth and I had written together. I love you with my whole heart, and with joy I give myself to you. I will support and respect you throughout all the changes in our lives. I will ask for what I need, and I will honor your needs. I will cherish your dreams, and I will share my dreams with you. I will do my best to make you smile and laugh every day. I will pray with you, and I will pray for you. I promise to be your lover, best friend, and soulmate in this life, and if God wills it, in the hereafter. Was I truly going to abandon the person who created these vows with me, say goodbye to Beth simply because she was changing her gender? Was gender that important? Reason enough to leave the love of my life? Was I that thankless, that careless and stupid? No, I was not. But I was afraid. What if I couldn't handle Beth's transition? What if I was no longer attracted to her? Maybe she would morph into my ex-husband and issue proclamations with her newly deep voice. Then he would de-dike our home, erase our past, erase me. These fears dogged me throughout Ben's transition, growing more frenzied as we flew from our home in Iowa City to San Francisco, where Ben had his chest surgery. He was not allowed to wear jewelry in the operating room, so this time I was the keeper of our wedding rings. I wore his on the pointer finger of my left hand. Except for its size, it was exactly like mine, a slender gold band with sparkling notches. We'd been so happy when we bought them, when the jeweler had put them in matching cases shaped like hearts. Soon this memory would be tarnished. Ben would cast aside his feminine ring for a new manly one. Our rings would no longer be the same. We would no longer be women together. As was often the case with Ben's transition, my predictions had been too dire. He did indeed find his wedding ring too feminine, but instead of casting it aside, he decided to wear another, more masculine ring with it. About 2 months after his surgery, on the same day he got his legal name change and a new driver's license with an M for male, we bought a new ring for him. We also bought 2 rings to exchange at our second wedding. Even though Ben wouldn't be legally male until he was issued a new birth certificate, once he was, we would have another wedding, and Uncle Sam would finally sanction our 10-year marriage. We would exchange pinky rings because they sometimes signal gayness. Our new wedding bands would celebrate our unconventional relationship, our bond with each other and the GLBT community. Now, when I consider our 5 rings, when I reflect on the time that elapsed between our 2 weddings, I see what kept us together. Ben's patience. Once, when I told him I'd need time to get used to his new name, he said, "We have all the time in the world." Ben gave me time to see that my fears about his transition were unfounded, time to mourn the loss of Beth, and time to celebrate the emergence of Ben and witness his revolutionary joy. He gave me time to move past my anger. Early in his transition, when we lay on our couch together, he said, "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. You worked so hard to come out. You deserve a full-on woman." He gave me time to accept my mixed feelings, to know, really know, that I can sometimes miss the woman I once thought Ben was and still love the man he has become. And he gave me time and encouragement to redefine my own identity as a lesbian. "Why," he asked, "should you have to change your sexual orientation just because I changed my gender?" He also said, "If people are confused, that's their problem. Tell them the world is a confusing place and that they need to learn to deal with it." Yet even now, I sometimes wonder how I can call myself a lesbian since I'm married to a man. The answer is simple. I feel like a lesbian. Except for ultra-politically correct feminists and softball, I love lesbian culture. I love coming out stories and lesbian weddings and the WNBA. I love Dykes to Watch Out For, Jane Lynch and Jodie Foster. I love Ellen Hart's Jane Lawless and Cordelia Thorne. Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, Desert Hearts, Go Fish, and Tipping the Velvet. I love the poetry of Adrienne Rich and Audre Lorde. I love the word lesbian, its beauty and its history. Sappho on the Isle of Lesbos, lyre in hand, surrounded by enthralled women. During Ben's transition, however, I realized that I had romanticized my lesbian identity and invested it with way too much meaning and power. My lesbian identity is not like some Harry Potter Patronus. It cannot protect me from free-floating misogyny or middle-class complacency. It can't save me from body image issues or skincare ads. It is not the source of my inner strength. But it does help me find and build community. It helps others begin to get to know me. It helps me begin to make sense of myself and my relationships, including my marriage. I've always loved Ben's hands, and now I love his 3 rings. They symbolize his commitment not only to our relationship, but also to our gloriously complex identities. Ben's ring finger, his original wedding band paired with a thicker, more masculine one, reminds me that our second wedding built upon our first, that Ben embraced his future while honoring our past. Ben's first wedding ring is secure on his finger. Together with the new one, it is more beautiful than ever.
So, your reading is very poignant for me because I am also married to somebody who trans-identifies, female to male, and I still identify as a lesbian.
Yay!
I know. Woo!
I remember when we met at Golden Crown, Liz, I was so excited to learn that about you.
I know, because I was asking, I think I was asking you about your partner or something, and then, I could tell you had that internal pause, and then you told me that you're married to a man, and I was like, oh, okay. And then we chatted a little more, and you explained. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think we both shrieked.
We did. we shrieked like teenage girls because it's such a weird land to live in. I mean, you met your partner, and at the time, your partner was Beth, correct?
Correct.
So for me, I always knew that's where Ilya stood, but I was very stalwart in my identity as a lesbian. I was like, I'm not giving that up. It's mine. So.
Well, I think that's great. Your identity should be yours.
Right? It's, and you would think it was so simple. But, there's some things that kind of still get under my skin. And one of them is there was this butch lesbian who was in my wedding party. And whenever I would see her at the bar that I frequented, she would ask about my wife, and every time she said it, I felt like cringing. And I was like, she's not my wife. Ilya's my husband, but in my head. So anytime she asked me that question, the intention of the question of checking in on how my partner is completely lost in the message of calling Ilya my wife.
Yeah, that's hard. Does she do that on purpose or just accidentally?
I think she's oblivious.
Yeah. Well, I can remember that difficult time when people were still getting used to switching the pronouns, and how careful I always thought I had to be, to model the correct ones.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, those little words do make a huge difference.
It's so funny because Ilya doesn't care so much about pronouns like he or she. The caring on Ilya's side is on the terms of endearment, mm-hmm. which is the way that I refer to Ilya. Mm-hmm. I call her papi, which I told her she's lucky she's Spanish because I couldn't call her daddy. But it's cute because she's Puerto Rican and I can call her papi. That's great. And all my other in terms of endearment are all masculine. And when I refer to my spouse, it's my husband.
Yeah.
Like those are more important. But the he, she thing is. And I know that, like, I always feel like I'm a terrible trans wife because I'm awful about the pronouns. But I think what makes it even more complicated is when you're a lesbian, that having a partner that is a she, is important. And so for some reason, I hold on to that pronoun.
Right. Yeah, I always wonder, when I should explain the complexity of Ben and I's identity, and when I should just let it go. I hardly ever explain it to straight people.
Mm-hmm. It's really, it's complex, and maintaining there are certain things that have been negotiated between me and my spouse, which will be private. But, you know, I feel like I still have my lesbian space within my relationship. So that's important to me. And then we just have conflicts on stuff. Like, for some reason, I have to be straight, jokingly straight, or I have to be a lady, or I'm the girl, or whatever. And the bigger fights that we have is not over pronouns, but over pictures. Because I have some very butch pictures of myself. One picture in particular, you'd be hard-pressed to know that was not a man. And I had it as my profile picture a while back, and like she was so upset with me. You know, she wanted me to delete it, and then she just left the room because she was so upset. And I was like, why is my gender so integral to yours? You know? Yeah. Like,
yeah, that must have been frustrating.
Because I don't know what to do with that. And, you know, Ellie's not a feminist, and we don't have a lot of the same ground to negotiate. And even though we have these tensions, I still think that we have a strong relationship. But the things that we have to negotiate, like gender and sexuality and who we are and whatnot, is a constant part of our life. But yeah, so it's not simple. Yeah.
I wonder how much more the negotiating gender is than it is for people where neither one of them is trans. Seems like there's probably always some negotiating of gender going on.
Yeah, and I know that there's that, and power play. You know, some people get involved in power play, not in a bad way, but a fun way, for like people who are in the BDSM community. But there's negotiating and compromise in every relationship, and I'd have to say this is my longest relationship and the one with the least amount of drama. And even though there are a few battleground sites for us, so to speak, none of them are very intense, or, you know, no raised voices, no shouting, you know, no arguments. It's just that kind of gripping onto territory.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I've been with Ben for 20 years, so he's definitely the person I feel the most compatible with. And I think over time, some of the gender stuff just became less and less important when I saw how happy he was, and also when I saw that some of my worst fears weren't coming true.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and there's nothing that's a deal breaker for me. It's just very interesting for me to negotiate this kind of ground. And like you said in your story, that, you know, you had worked hard and it was an effort and whatnot to come out and to be true to yourself and self-actualized. And it's, you know, I'm sure that there are plenty of spouses who worry about being yanked into a closet.
Yeah, I was worried. I was very worried about that. And really, you sort of need to come out twice. You know, not that I'm very careful about Ben's privacy and not outing him when he doesn't want to be outed, but, you know, pretty much the same people that I came out to as a lesbian, then I needed to again come out to them as the partner of a trans guy, you know, in order to be honest and genuine with them. You know, and it just like when I came out as a lesbian, I received a lot of really rich and generous and wise responses. So it was a good experience, but, you know, coming out is also stressful.
Well, you know, what is just so ironic is when I came out to my parents when I was 19, and my father thought it was a phase, and so he wasn't as upset, and my mom begged me not to tell anybody. And I was like, I didn't really care as much. I didn't have somebody in my life at that point. But then when I met somebody shortly before I graduated Mount Holyoke and moved in with my very butch girlfriend, things were a huge change, and it was very traumatic and difficult, and there was lots of crying on my mother's part and some serious rift action. And then, which was weird because like I was raised by, my parents were hippies in the 60s and 70s. I mean, they changed to a certain extent, but anyway. So I wasn't expecting that. And now I have a trans partner who's got a better relationship with my parents than I do. And what's complex about it is that I have a compromised relationship with my parents because of what happened before they got over the hurdle and accepted me. Mm-hmm. And since Ilya doesn't have that scar tissue, she's more open. And also she gets along with people really well. So it's funny, you would think that a source of tension would be the trans partner, and when in reality, Ilya's the peacemaker.
That's great.
So, originally, when I started about a year or so ago, when I moved down here, I started going to this PFLAG meeting that was an LGBT support group. And the woman who ran it, when she found out that I had a trans partner and that we'd been in a long-term relationship, wanted me to go to the support meeting that they had for the trans community. And I was reluctant because I didn't think I was a very good role model or example. But I guess in reality, seeing that there could be somebody that would love you, for all of who you are, even if there are these constant negotiation with gender,
Yeah, loving someone for who they are is huge.
So, I mean, it gives them hope that, because there are a lot of folks that transition and transition because they need to be true to themselves, but are also concerned that they could never be completely open and out and loved at the same time.
Yeah, and that's so sad.
It is, and there are folks who, they try and keep it a secret until they kind of know somebody better, and it's just such a tangled web to walk through, and I don't envy their journey. So it's a very complex thing. Ilya and I have gone. We went to a couple of meetings here and there, but it's not Ilya's thing.
Yeah,
she's not a community person kind of thing. But she was going to be supportive for me, but it's like, I don't even know what kind of role model I am to these folks, but at least it shows that there's a possibility of long-term, and acceptance. It's one of the things I do bring up in the gay meeting is how things may be dark and hard and awful and may seem hopeless where you're at. And then I explain where my parents are at when it comes to Ilya and how people will shock you.
Yeah. Well, I know I was very surprised at my mom's reaction when I told her that Ben was transgender, because she is a very conservative Catholic who did not react well when I came out as a lesbian. But, that was a really long time ago. And I think she's just gotten used to the fact that I'm going to do things that jolt her. And I was, I had a little outline prepared to explain to her what it meant. And so I told her, I said, Beth is transgender. Do you know what that means? And she said, oh yeah, I've seen that on Oprah. and if you had any idea how not like my mother that is, and I was just like, thank you, Oprah, thank you. I mean, I know she doesn't give the full story of the trans experience, but I was so happy not to have to explain it. And then my mom said, well, is there anything you need? And I said, well, if you can try to use male pronouns and call him Ben, that would be great. And she's like, well, I'll sure try. Oh. And I'm just like, wow, okay. What a happy and pleasant surprise.
Yay. So, listeners out there are happy and pleasant surprises to be had, even when you hand over the big news.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. This has been a very rich episode. I love that you shared 2 essays, which is unique to the show, and they had a very awesome NPR-like feel to them.
Thank you.
Lends gravitas to my frivolous show.
Who would have thought?
Who would have thunk is amazing. Yes. So I'm really happy that you came on the episode and you read from Seminal Murder and the 2 essays, and I've been happy to have you as a guest.
Well, I've been delighted to be here, Liz. Take care.
Take care.